At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES.
Only on Super NES.
You're listening to the SNES podcast with your host, Soulblazer.
Hello, everybody. Super NES podcast coming at you here. I am Greg, joined always by Joe.
Hello.
This is episode number 283, this time covering one of Joe's picks. Joe, what game did you want us to cover this time?
We're covering Congo's Caper.
Yes, this is a fairly obscure game. I think it was a game that was more known back then when it was released than it is now, because it's definitely one of those like forgettable games, I feel like. Not to really say anything about the game quality. It's quality itself yet at this point, but it's like I think a lot of people would probably forget about this. But it has its fans, and it has its fans, and and there is a release of the game coming pretty soon. So if this podcast makes you want to check out the game, you'll be able to do so pretty soon in more than one way. So that's always cool when an old game like this is legally available to play. But this is connected to the Joe and Mac franchise. The exact connection to that we'll get into in just a moment. Because it's also like a bit of controversy. But what made you want to cover this game, Joe?
This is just one of those weird games that I happened to see, and the title of the article I saw was the pseudo sequel to Joe and Mac that you probably have never heard about. And
that's fairly accurate.
yeah. So that got me intrigued, and then I kind of looked over the article real quick, and I was like, well, it's something we haven't covered yet, and we're going to get there anyway, so I was like, we'll do it now. And then, coincidentally, I guess they have a collection coming out, so, I mean, it's timely as well.
Well, the game is available on Switch already to play. But
yes, on the NSO.
But there's a collection coming out pretty soon, which I was going to touch upon here pretty soon as well. So, so this is the middle game of the 3-game strong Joe and Mac franchise. I'm sorry. There is a 4th game in the franchise. What was it called? I guess it was a modern take on the franchise released somewhat recently.
Actually, that would technically be the 5th entry. So the first entry is the arcade game that was released, and then the 2 home system versions, Joe and Mac 1 and 2, and then this is technically the 4th.
Yeah. So
and then that remake would have been the 5th.
I'm not counting the console versions of the arcade game as being like on release. So I guess 4 games then altogether in the franchise. But Joe and Mac's a series I have. Joe and Mac's is a series I have some experience with. I remember playing both the arcade version back in the day and also the the Super NES port of the game, which I don't think we ever did cover in this podcast, by the way. I think it's one of those games that we just never got around to it. So I know we never covered the sequel, but anyway, so I believe this is our first Joe and Mac game covered here on the franchise. Of the franchise stay here in the podcast. But anyway, so Joe and Mac's a pretty good game, I thought. They had to censor the game some for its Super NES release because Nintendo's policies at the time. But the arcade version of Joe and Mac is pretty good. So this was a game created by, developed by, and published by Diddy's, which was a big arcade video game company at the time. We covered them before in the past podcast. I won't go into too much attention about this. Congo's Caper is either the what it is depends upon who you ask, basically what market you're looking at, because the game was created. The game was created by and released originally for the Japanese Super NES, Super Famicom market in December of 1992, and they consider it to be a sequel because the name of the game in Japan on Japanese it translates to Caveman Combat 2: The Adventures of Rookie. So definitely the two indicates that it indicates definitely that they consider it to be a sequel. However, when it was released in the West, it came out in North America in May of 1993, and Europe later on that year. It was decided by the Data East forum managers, branches, whoever made the decision that the game should be renamed for one reason or another. I really couldn't find an exact reason as to why they wanted to be renamed, except I saw one argument online that they didn't consider this game to be a sequel to Joe and Mac for reasons we're going to get to here in a moment, and so they renamed the game as Congo's Caper, and they called it a spin-off. So whether or not you call it a sequel or a spin-off depends upon like who you ask. The game did get Joe Mac did get a proper sequel, which was the sequel Joe already Joe already touched upon briefly here in a moment. Which we will cover for the system later on too. Joe and Mac 2 Lost the Tropics. We actually did not plan to do that this year. So I guess next year we'll get around to covering that one. So
yeah, and I just looked through the library. It looks like we didn't, or you haven't covered the first game either. So
okay,
we'll
we covered both
1 and
games
2 together. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So, and then. Yes, and there's the more modernish entry. Entering the franchise as well too, after being dormant for a very long time, which is called New Joe and Mac Caveman Ninja, released back 2022. Very nice graphical style to that game. It definitely looks like a cartoonish inspired, but the game got mixed reviews.
Yeah, I felt they did a pretty good job with that.
Yeah, I've not played this one myself, so I can't really comment on it too much, but it was kind of a surprise to see a franchise from a game, a new game in a franchise that hadn't been touched upon for a long time.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, Congo's Caper, as I already mentioned, is available to play right now on the Switch. Switch if you want to, as part of the Nintendo collection. And there is a collection planned, as alluded to before, called the Joe and Mac Retro Collection, which will include all three games, Joe and Mac 1, Joe and Mac 2, and Congo's Caper, planned for release for Steam and modern consoles sometime this year. There's no release date given for it yet. So it should be out later on this year at some point, 2026 it looks like. So if you're listening to this in the future, you hopefully will be able to pick that up as well. So Congo's Caper is one of those games where the franchise is based upon got started in the arcades, but this is a console exclusive entry in the franchise, much like R-Type that we covered before on the podcast a few months ago. Designed from the ground up for the Super NES, it's the Super NES. It takes advantage of the Super NES's hardware and what it can do. And this game only got released on Super NES. I'm surprised there wasn't Genesis ported this game, because so many stuff wasn't ported to Genesis at this time period, but it wasn't. Yeah. So this remains a Super NES exclusive. So. So gameplay is similar to Joe and Mac, like in many ways. Let me ask Joe here for his thoughts about the gameplay, the gameplay, how this plays, and then I can add on to that.
Yeah. So I just want to cover real quick. So, games like this, story is not a huge thing, but
it's a very silly story.
I found it very funny that basically the story of evolution begins with these red orbs that fall from the sky and change these monkeys into monkey-human hybrids. And of course, as that happens, your girlfriend is kidnapped and your adventure begins.
It's a very silly story.
Yeah. So, typical silly story.
Yeah.
It is an action platformer in every sense of the word. You get two real functions here, A and B. This is just proof that the controls are very simple. Like it is labeled as A and B do jump, X and Y do attack. Like that's it. Like you got your two things and that's it.
You are
Now-
able to remap the controls though, which I like.
Correct. You can do that in the options, which is awesome. Also, if you press up and A, it'll let you jump a little higher. If you hit down and attack, it'll actually do like a diving attack, which will help. But this is generally your typical platformer. Run to the right. Eventually, you get to a boss. I did kind of like how the game starts you off it feels like a typical platformer. You're killing enemies, you're collecting gems. There are yellow gems that you pick up, but also there's like blue ones that cause a slot machine to spin. That, go figure. Some slot machine, and basically you can win extra lives or power ups or more gems. And then, yeah, where was I going with that? Jeez. Oh, and then, you'll end up, fighting a boss. So here in the, your opening level, you kind of get familiar with your controls and how the game's going to play. And then as soon as you beat that opening area, it opens up to basically, you can choose how you're going to attack this game. There's 4 villains that are introduced to you and 4 worlds. And each world has a certain amount of areas. I did lose count of the areas, but I think I got something like 30 different areas.
35 for total.
Okay, so 35 total. Technically 6 bosses. I don't want to spoil the final boss. But yeah. So the 5th boss is the little a winged demon thing that kidnapped your girl, but after you defeat her, a secret boss comes up, which is actually connected to the franchise, which is why I don't want to spoil it too much.
Speaking about the franchise connections, kind of an Easter egg here. In case you're wondering about the names, the names like it before. You play as Congo, obviously in this game, hence the name like Congo's Caper. But he was called Rookie in the Japanese version, which by the Japanese version, the Japanese name for this light refers to Rookie. And your girlfriend, who's unimaginably called Conget in this one, right, guys? But had a better name in Japan. She was known as Ally. ALAI, who's the same girl in Super Monkey Ball. Yeah. So there's another franchise connection there as well too. But I don't think Super Monkey Ball had been released in the West yet at this point, which is probably why they felt the change. Which probably why Davies I felt the need to change her name too.
Yeah, and the other connection is there's a nice little Easter egg while you're playing the game where you come across a Joe and Mac stone statue.
Yes, I remember that. Yep.
I mean, which other than the final boss that you deal with is really the only connection to that world, other than, like we said, Congo's, namesake. But, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of like other things I can really talk about, but there really isn't much. Like, you have your club attack, you can collect your gems. Like I said, you can get other gems that, will spin the slot machine. There are some difficult parts in the game, but this game is very accessible. Like, you collect extra lives like it's nothing. This felt very much like a Super Mario game, and I don't mean like a traditional Super Mario game. I mean like a modern Super Mario game where like they just throw extra lives at you for no reason at all. They just throw them at you. I felt like that's kind of how this game was. I think I had like something like 45 lives by the time I got through this thing.
So not only did people back then comment on the comment like on the Super Mario World connection, I felt the same way too.
Yeah.
This game, because you're right, basically about this game. On paper, this game looks like a sequel to Joe and Mac. However, when you're playing it, you realize it's not really a sequel at all. It uses the Joe and Mac formula,
right?
But the game looks and feels very different, which is probably why Dades USA was like, let's call it something else, because it's something else to call it a spin-off instead of like a sequel. Because,
right.
Because I agree with them. I think this game is more spin-off than sequel to Joe and Mac. It definitely is Joe and Mac inspired, but because I said, Super Mario World obviously set the gold standard for what a good platformer should be.
Right.
And this game obviously has a lot of that in common. Collect 100 diamonds, you get an extra life. Slot machine, the slot machine mechanic here. It plays different in this game, but it is here. You're able to take one-handed damage like Mario World.
Yep.
If you get hit, you go back to monkey form. If you get hit again, you die. So that's kind of like Mario going down to small Mario, like then dying at that point. So like I said, you can also power back up again to your half human, half monkey form later as well too. And difficulty, you already touched upon this, Joe. So I guess this could segue.
Yeah.
Compared to Joe and Mac, which obviously was aimed toward an older crowd. Being an arcade game first and foremost, arcade games are going to be difficult because you're quarter munchers, blah blah blah, all that story. This game is clearly designed for a younger audience because not only does it let the game look and feel cutish toward like your kids. Mm-hmm. It's also fairly easy. It's also fairly easy by platform standards. This is not if you want an easy platformer game to play that's like Mario World in many ways. This is a very good one to play because you can go through this game, like Joe said, in an hour, and probably won't even need to continue unless some of the boss fights can be difficult, like you don't learn the patterns. Once you learn the patterns, most of the boss fights I felt were fairly easy. The one hit system is generous. There's no difficulty level. There's no difficulty settings in the menu. There's basically which again separates this game from many platformers. There's just the base, which I would call easy difficulty level, and that's it. So anybody looking for a challenge is not going to find one here, unfortunately. But like I said, if you want like an easier game for kids, that's what it was designed for, or you just don't, or you just are not a good platform player to begin with, which nowadays, let's be honest, me.
I was going to say, or you're getting up there in age because my reflexes are definitely not what they used to be.
Yeah. So I wish the game was a bit harder, sure, but I also I was surprised by how easy this game felt. But however, it was nice to play a game in a setting and struggle only a few times and not really feel like that your head was being banged against the wall again and again. In a numerous difficulty settings. So that was kind of nice.
Yeah.
So the difficulty definitely is a mixed bag. I think it's okay. I know what they're getting for, but I'm just saying you have to understand who the target audience was for this game when it came out 30 years ago. Well, 30 years ago at this point. Because it was designed for a console, the difficulty is more balanced compared to the arcade game, which is obviously going to be very extremely brutal. And the console versions usually keep that brutal difficulty when they're ported over. Like in the arcades. So, but anyway, yeah. So, So there are some secret stages to find in this game as well too.
Yes.
So some exploring, some exploring is encouraged, for sure. So, since we're talking about this game's program for the ground for the Super NES, I guess it's a good segue to talk about graphics and sound effects. Graphics are very good. They're done in Joe and Mac's style. They're definitely a bit more cutish, I thought, than Joe and Mac.
Yeah.
But yeah, they definitely the programmers definitely knew what they're doing when they're making this game. Definitely takes advantage of the Super NES hardware. The game looks good, sounds good, sound effects are sharp and clear. The game handles well, controls are tight. Hit detection seemed fine to me. Maybe a couple of small quibbles here and there, but nothing really egregious. The sprites are big and detailed. Like you're big, the enemies are big. Everything really seems very nice. There's a good variety of colors and backgrounds used. Which use the stages. Music's pretty good. It's not like amazing, but it is a pretty good kind of Joe Macish inspired caveman sounding soundtrack that's appropriate for a platformer. It's not earwormy, but definitely is good enough to keep you to want you to it definitely is good enough to leave the volume on while you're playing the game, I thought.
Yeah. And I agree with everything you touched upon. Literally, that's what I have in my notes. The characters are well detailed, big, colorful. I thought the colors in this game were great. And same with the environments that you encounter. Everything is just really nice. Sound effects are great. Music, I wouldn't go so far to say it's fantastic, but it's good enough for the game. It never at any point made me want to shut it off, which is always a plus. So yeah, I mean, this game surprised me big time because, seeing gameplay and playing it are two totally different things. And I try to explain that to people sometimes because they'll always be like, well, I'll look up a video on YouTube to see how the game is. That can give you a visual idea, but like until you have that controller in your hand, you really don't know. So having seen, read the article, I did, of course, Google a quick video of gameplay so I can kind of get an idea. And then that's when I made the decision that we should cover this. And to actually have a controller in my hand and play this game, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I thought it was, obviously it's something like, this is the one thing I have to say this podcast has done for me. So as a Sega kid, like Super Nintendo was here and there. It was special because I didn't own it. But now being able to go back and, play these games, like I appreciate the Super Nintendo library. There's a lot of games that are just kind of middle of the road, but yet still hit hard. And I think this game is a prime example of that. It is your traditional platformer. It is generic, but also it's got great music, great graphics. The gameplay's tight and it's great. So, I kind of jumping ahead here, but you should play Congo Scaper.
Yeah. So, yes, I agree with most of that. I played this on Switch. Flight is available on there. So, so Pro controller versus Super NES controller, not much of a difference, but it was still fine. Further reinforcing the idea of this game's for kids. Not only do you have continues, you also have a password system, like this game, like as well too. So, which is a very easy password system to use, by the way. So, so it definitly encourages. They definitely push this game hard for kids. Kids for the start, which again is a surprise, but it's like Joe Mac was not made for kids. It's definitely like a more teenager / young adult game based upon both the graphics and also the difficulty. I don't know if you've ever played Joe Mac in the arcades, Joe, but it was definitely much more sexualized in the arcades. So like I said, they had toned down some like the home versions, but so again, I think Diddy's USA made the right choice in to rename this game and decided to call it a spin-off as opposed to a sequel because it's not really a sequel. No disrespect to the Japanese who made this game, who did consider it to be a sequel, but anyway, so. Replay value is of course minimal unless you're minimal for a game like this. But again, also considering the target audience it was made for, that's fine. So, and obviously the game is popular enough that they're including it like they're including it like in the collections coming out pretty soon. Yeah. As well also. I don't think I enjoyed this game quite as much as you did, Joe, but I do think this is like a very good, competent platformer game. It definitely is fun. It definitely is, a well-programmed, well-designed game. I would have liked it to have been more Joe and Mac-ish inspired than what it actually turned out to be, and I would have, Personally, I would prefer the game to be just a smidgen harder. Either that, or give us a choice of difficulty settings. But I understand also who this game was made for.
Yeah.
So, like I said, the game holds up. The game holds up fine today. I think. If you have a young kid, or if you're not very good at platformers, this is a great entry point. But it still plays, looks, handles, and sounds great even today. So, that's another thing. That's another thing that's so charming about the Super NES and Genesis 16-bit graphics. Their graphics never go out of style. So, some games look better than others, obviously, but most games like this have aged gracefully as far as graphics and music goes. They haven't always aged very well in terms of gameplay, but as far as as far as music and graphics, there's a timeless charm to them, which is why 16-bit games are so popular even today, and why that style is so popular to use for modern retro titles as well. Not much in it. So there is one code you can use in this game. Well, not really a code, but there is a kind of Easter egg / secret you can do in this game to make the game even easier for you if you want to, by giving yourself unlimited lives. So in the haunted stage, if you find Joe's statue and repeatedly whack it with your club, you can get as many lives you want.
Interesting.
So,
I did not know that. Not that you would need it, in my opinion, but that's nice that it's in there.
Yes. So not many magazines covered this game back in the day. For some reason, I think it was a very kind of like a very quiet release, even though it had, because like I said, the manual. I looked at the manual. The manual makes no reference at all to this being tied into the Joe Mac franchise. So Day's didn't really. I think Day's had tried to say it was inspired, or at least gave some connection to Joe Mac somewhere in the box. Maybe the game was sold a bit better, but as it was, this seemed like a very quiet release that just kind of slipped under the radar, and nobody really gave it much thought. It has a lot of fans. A lot of people do remember playing this game as a kid back then and whatnot. So the game did sell, I guess, reasonably well. But I found a whole 4 magazines which covered the game back in the day, and for the most part, they said about the game what we've already said. Good reviews across the board. GameFan gave it 83.5% out of 100. Power Limited gave it 80 out of 100. Nintendo Power gave it. Well, there's no score given here. But they said a very positive article. They basically just said, the game doesn't do anything original, but it does those things well, which is to feel like it's pretty accurate. All game also gave the game 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's a fun variety game. They said, they commented how easy it was. They also said, curiously enough, that the game's controls kind of felt stiff. I didn't feel that way. Maybe just because I'm used to more modern games that kind of play more like this one is. But the controls felt fine to me as far as playing them again. I was playing the game via emulation using a Pro controller. So I really don't know if that was some kind of commentary in the Super NES controller back then or whatnot. But yeah, the controls felt fine to me. So I really don't know. I really don't know what they meant by that.
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat. I was playing off an emulator, so I guess some tweaks could have been done to make it, better. But yeah, I didn't notice any difference.
Yeah. So anyway, so being a platformer, this is one of our short episodes. So sorry about that. There's just really not really a lot you can say about this game. It's a very fun, competent platformer. Definitely, I definitely want to make me check out Joe Mac 1 and 2. So we will cover those games. Certainly a point later on, because I do have more. I do have memories and experience playing those games. Whereas for some reason I missed this one. I never even heard about this game until recently. So, but like I said, very quiet release. Game this game seems like it's sold fairly well based upon prices on eBay. We'll get to that in a moment, but yeah. So it's nice to have a game that's available to play in a modern format, a modern system, if you want to as well. So you don't always have to do the somewhat dodgy emulation thing to get your hands on these games. Like you prefer not to. So I prefer to go legal where I can. So I definitely appreciate the fact this game is available out there still. So so thank you very much for recommending that we check out this one, Joe. Joe, I was very pleasantly surprised. A few quibbles aside, I thought this was a pretty good, competent, solid platformer. Definitely catered toward people who may not be the best at platformer games. Anything else you want to say about this game in wrapping things up?
Nope, I'm just going to reiterate that you should definitely play it.
I agree. So if you're a fan if you are a fan of the Joe Mac collection games and didn't play this one for whatever reason, like me, you might want to go out to keep your eye out like the collection that's coming out later on this year. I don't know how much it's going to sell for. If I had to guess, 3 games, they're probably going to be looking somewhere around like $20 and $30. Just kind of like my, which I'm sure will drop very soon on sale prices and whatnot. So, which seems a very, if it is sold, if the collection is sold at that price, it seems like a price. It seems like it seems like a fair value. Yeah. You can already wish this. Yeah, you can already wish this the game on Steam and also on Switch, and PS and PS5 if you want to as well. So. So you'll be sent a reminder like when it comes out. Yeah. Anyway, I mentioned upon eBay before. Games a little bit pricier than you might be they're pricier than Super NES games. Like I said, this game probably was a lowish release, so I'm not surprised by these numbers. At the time of doing research, I found 32 copies of this game. This game available for sale on eBay, with 20 copies that recently sold. There's only 3 games out of those 20 that sold that were CIB, but there was enough of a spread on those 3 copies to kind of give what I feel is an accurate range for what the game goes for in that condition. So card only. These prices include North American copies only, and also include shipping. Card only is a little bit pricier for Super NES games, but not that bad. The card only prices were ran from $25 to $36. CIB copies selling for $108 to $165. So a little pricier, but still not that bad. Like overall thoughts.
Yeah, that's not that bad. I mean, I was thinking it was more obscure than that, so I was expecting $50-$60 for the card, almost $300 for the box. So yeah, that's actually really good.
Yeah, well, like I said before at the beginning, I think this is a game that probably sold fairly well when it came out back then, but people have kind of forgotten about these days.
Yeah.
So the fact that you found this being found this game being talked about in a video. I'm sorry, it wasn't a video, an article, you said, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, I don't think they used the word hidden gem. So I wouldn't for this. I wouldn't go so far. Go so far as to say it's a hidden gem, but definitely is a very underrated game. It definitely is a game. It definitely is something. Definitely one that deserves more attention than it gets.
Yep, I agree.
So again, I think a lot of people are going to be surprised when they were surprised play this game in the collection coming out pretty soon as well too, especially because Joe Mac 1 and 2 got all the attention, and this game I felt really didn't get much press after its initial release. But anyway, fun platformer, kind of easy, kind of nice to play, an easier game for a change. So I definitely was happy to spend time on this and have a good time. Even I might quibble a little bit that the game could be a smidgen harder, but just very, very well designed, well programmed, well put together game. So that definitely is a spin-off in my mind, and not a sequel to the Joe Mac games for sure.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, that will wrap things up for this week. Next episode, We are probably, I don't know exactly what we're covering the next time around. We definitely, we are still arranging guest host spots. So I'll just say the next game Joe and I are covering by ourselves. You may hear something else before that, but we're going to be looking at another platformer, a game I do remember playing and liking as a kid, but I've not played since the game first came out. So I'm curious to see how it holds up today. We're going to be covering Terminator versus RoboCop, which definitely probably took some inspiration from the Alien versus Predator crossover game that had come out recently in that same time period, being like, what happens if we put this character against this character? So
both were comic book series first. So yeah.
True. Yep.
So that's where this comes from, is the Frank Miller comic books, RoboCop versus Terminator. So yeah, this is going to be a fun one to cover.
And I do not remember that game being as easy as this one is. So,
no, it is not easy at all. No.
So wanted a challenge, you got it this time around.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, all right then. Thank you very much for giving us some of your time listening to us today. As always, we appreciate it. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, etc., you can find us on Facebook, or you can also send me an email directly to the SNES podcast at yahoo.com. Joe, how about you?
I have a very public Facebook, obviously not family friendly, so don't hold me to that. The other thing is X account at JOESUX30, and at some point I will be streaming again. I know I've been saying that like every episode, but whenever you hear it, I may have actually streamed, and that's at twitch.tv /JOESUX69.
Alrighty, appreciate it. Thanks you again, as always, everybody. Thank you again, Joe. And we'll catch everybody again later on. Take care, all. Be well.
Bye.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Now you're playing with power. Super power.